Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. As the United States of America carried out an act of aggression, the United States kidnapped it, abducted its president. Now it does appear that Venezuela's security apparatus was in on this. In defense of Maduro also, the United States had full air superiority. United States helicopters flew over Caracas. So there are so many details that ought to be discussed and researched. The United States' goals are, of course, well known, as well as to take control of its vast natural resources. Venezuela holds the largest oil reserves in the entire world, and valued at approximately $17 trillion, and many other countries combined. Trump stated that the U.S. is, quote, moving in and exploiting the country's resources, proper and judicious transition. And we have the same situation that we had for the United States is effectively, which gives Washington tremendous political and economic leverage. Regime change, of course, does not bring democracy, let's be clear. With its open slave markets, Libya used to be a relatively prosperous African country. It brings chaos and violence. The United States attack on Venezuela is part of a broader, and it is a signal of a much larger geopolitical shift. I would say what is unfolding is not simply a change of government. This is effectively a revival of an old imperial logic. After Venezuela, the targets are very clear. If you look broadly, regime change has become part of U.S. foreign policy. Puppet governments across Latin America and beyond that will sell off national assets to Wall Street for the right amount of money with Washington's interests. Now the transformation of Venezuela's political landscape. The country is being pulled into the zone of direct U.S. control. It's for everyone to see it's out in the open, not oil as a short-term windfall. In a world where energy still underpins military strength, geopolitical influence, President Trump himself spelled this out. Rebuilding Venezuela's oil infrastructure tells us everything we need to know. It is about investing now to dominate the entire Western Hemisphere later, in Eastern Hemisphere over time, effectively unlimited oil resources. If Iran is attacked, the flow of oil in the region may be disrupted. It can leverage those assets to its own benefit. And Iran, as we know, it is about constructing an energy lever that can be pulled at precisely the right moment and favorable for Washington. Even by conservative estimates, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually more than Saudi Arabia and way more than Russia. For its own domestic consumption, with up to 4 million barrels per day flowing south, Venezuela currently produces less than 1 million barrels per day that is operable and functional. It needs U.S. corporations that are willing to contribute to his campaign. And of course, the exploitation and extraction of natural resources in Venezuela, this is about control if U.S. production is combined with the oil sector of Venezuela, a large portion of global oil supply, where the U.S. influence is already growing. With enough investment measured not in billions, the United States could shape the future of global energy markets. That's a good question. Well, look at Africa. Just take a look at Africa. The scenario of that extraction. You export raw materials at a low cost from a colony to keep that exploitation running for decades. Washington could end up. The level of control does not need to be used aggressively. The threat of flooding the market with crude oil or constricting supply to shake prices to unsettle competitors and to discipline allies, where countries like Russia, very strong, and this is where history matters. In the mid-1980s, the Reagan administration helped drive down oil prices. That playbook has not been forgotten. That's been updated, of course. There's also a domestic angle that I would like to mention. Are perfectly positioned to process Venezuelan heavy crude oil, which means that Trump's campaign donors will be very well served. Control over Venezuelan production gives Washington flexibility, or it can be decreased to push prices up, where output is no longer growing as promised. Again, this means the people of Venezuela will be robbed blind of their resources. This is a dangerous scenario. Moscow also faces the loss of real tangible investments into Venezuela's oil sector, still outstanding that hasn't been paid by Venezuela to Russia, but over past commitments and financial exposure. Now China is a good question too. Washington could simply block Venezuela oil exports to China, which likely means it will deepen its energy cooperation with Russia. To deal with it, it has another option, which will, of course, undercut Russian exports. So there is a lot going on that I will post on my Substack and Patreon in the coming days. They are linked in the description below, and make sure that you check back for more videos on the subject. I appreciate every single one of you who has become a paid subscriber. I will see you back here tomorrow. Bye for now. On January the 3rd, the entire world was in pure shock. Against a sovereign neighboring country, Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro and his wife had conducted strikes on Caracas. From the very beginning, judging from the fact that not a single shot was fired, as was evidenced by multiple videos online, without Venezuelan air defense engaging, and investigated with regards to who facilitated this operation, it is to cut off Venezuela from China and Russia. As I posted on my X and Telegram, they are about 300 billion barrels, which is larger than the GDP of Japan. The United States is now effectively colonizing Venezuela, running Venezuela with large U.S. oil companies, effectively his donors. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in. Long period of years after moving into Guyana earlier, overseeing more than half of the world's crude oil reserves. And that is precisely what we're going to focus on in today's video. It does not bring peace. Look at Libya. After Gaddafi's regime was toppled by Western powers, now it is a failed state, so regime change brings civil war. Venezuela today is not just a country in crisis. Imperialist offensive against all of Latin America, one that stretches far beyond Caracas and far beyond Latin America, or an act of aggression against a single leader. That's been updated for a new era of global confrontation. Nicaragua and Cuba are next, probably Iran too. Its goal is to install obedient, of course, and the same governments, and align unconditionally and easily. Despite the interest of their population, has only just begun, but the direction is already unmistakable. And the foundation of that control is not hidden. And it is oil, not oil as quick profit, but oil as power, oil as leverage, oil as a strategic weapon, where it still underpins industrial capacity. And of course, when he said that major U.S. corporations would spend billions, that statement alone, in my opinion, this is not about pumping barrels tomorrow and cashing in next week. Some think that the U.S. influence weakens, but others argue that having unlimited oil resources enables U.S. aggression towards sovereign states in the future, such as Iran, for example. But now that the United States controls Venezuela, is now being actively destabilized from within by foreign actors, controlling Venezuela is about constructing an energy lever. When global conditions make it most effective, Venezuela's oil reserves are central to this calculation. The country sits atop nearly 300 billion barrels of oil. However, the irony is that the United States does not actually need Venezuelan oil. America already gets half of its heavy crude imports from Canada, flowing into the United States. Now, by contrast, so that just goes to show that it does not have the infrastructure to start producing on day one. Of course, support President Trump. They are willing and they're waiting to come in and invest, and then continue. But this is very crucial. It shows that this is not about supply shortages, which now stands at over 13 million barrels per day. Washington could directly influence. And then if you add neighboring Guyana, and the picture becomes even clearer. But in tens of billions of dollars, will the people of Venezuela ever benefit from it? And you know we know the answer very well. It has been exploited by the Western powers for centuries. Of that exploitation is a rinse and repeat type thing, and then you import finished goods at a much higher price. And to keep them poor, now taken as a whole, exerting influence over as much as 40% of the world's oil reserves, every single day to be effective, would be enough to be used as political leverage too. Trump has done it before. This is especially true in the heavy oil segment. For example, have traditionally been the United States has done this before. That worked very closely at the time with Saudi Arabia, which in turn inflicted severe economic damage on the Soviet Union. Control over Venezuelan oil offers Washington a similar mechanism. For the realities of the 21st century, in this video, U.S. refineries along the Gulf of Mexico, shorter logistics mean higher margins for U.S. corporations. But even more importantly, production can be ramped up to push prices down. That means stabilizing U.S. producers at home while using Venezuela as a pressure valve for the global market. What does this mean for Russia? Well, for Russia, beyond the threat of price manipulation, we know that billions of dollars have already been sunk. There are billions of dollars in debt and control over Venezuela means leverage, not just over markets, that's associated with oil production. China is directly threatened, though, of course, in a different way, and that would force Beijing to find replacement supplies. But the United States could also find an alternative route. It may offer Venezuelan oil to China at a steep discount. And I will continue the discussion in a separate article, so make sure that you are subscribed to my Substack and Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested, and thank you so much for watching as always, thank you so much for your support. Enjoy the rest of your day.